Hello and good morning. Great. Good morning, everyone, and an incredibly warm welcome to Communicate 2025. My name is Savita Willmott. I'm Chief Executive of the Natural History Consortium, which is a charity and collaboration of these 13 organizations who come together each year to do a number of projects together, but the Communicate Conference has been a steadfast part of our programming for over 20 years now, since 2004. And we're kicking off a 3-day event. It's great to be here with so many of you here in Manchester as well. But we're also delighted to have hundreds of you joining us online through our hybrid program from all over the country. So if you're joining us online, do say hello to everyone else in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from. And we here in Manchester really look forward to bringing your voices and views into our program today. I really want to say a special thank you up front to the Economic and Social Research Council, ESRC, and also the Royal College of Art for their financial support for this year's conference. And the really particular thing that allowed us to do this year was to run a bursary program across our conference. So across our 3 days, we've been able to bring in 30 people from community groups and underrepresented groups, and around 40 people joining us online. So thank you for that. So the biggest question I always get asked is, where does the program come from for Communicate? Where do all the sessions come from? And they really come from all of you, from the people who are working in the environmental communication sector. So our very first place we look was last year's evaluation form. So those who came last year and filled that in, thank you. But even those of you who are new, so many people email us throughout the year and say, do you know what, I've seen this great bit of practice, this great project, this great person working at any kind of organization. Let's bring them together and learn from them. So thank you to everyone who's done that. But our editorial committee from all of these organizations also set a theme for each year. And this year, as we started to receive everyone's emails and feedback, we started to hear the same thing over and over again, which is that it's really hard out there right now. And so we set this year's theme as Against the Odds. And we're hoping that it will be both a kind of practical and hopeful response to that theme. And one thing we really want to surface is, what odds are you facing? We know between us kind of some of the odds and challenges that nature is facing. But for some of you, it may be external pressures around funding, around political realities, around social division. There may be organizational changes. You might be working across multi-sites, working more online. Or maybe, it's internal. Maybe you've been doing this work for a really long time, or maybe you're new to the sector and trying to find your place. So over the next 3 days, we've set up 60 sessions. We've got 145 speakers joining us, and we're so grateful to them. But they're not the experts. They're just the people who've agreed to take our invitation and get the conversation started, to be provocateurs, to surface some difficult questions, to ask each other questions. And the rest is up to us. So over the next 3 days, I'll be asking, what are you working on? What odds are you up against? What can you need? What kind of partnerships would support? And can you find some, inspiration, new contacts, some ideas in the notebook or on your phone to take back to your desk later this week? So speaking of getting the conversation started, I'm really delighted to open our first speaker to the stage. Shovi Anjum is a brilliant young conservationist working in the Solway Firth Partnership, and she's going to get our conversation started talking about some of the odds that she is up against. So if you can help me welcome Shovi to the stage.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It is really exciting to be here today, opening up Communicate 2025 in Manchester, especially because I used to study here in Manchester a couple years back. I'm a geographer in training, and so I learned a lot about nature, specifically some of the roots that underpin the environmental sector and the work we do today. So things like the Enlightenment period, and also the separation of people and nature and society that kind of coincided with industrialization. So I now work in a very rural place, and I've learned a lot. So I've been working 2 years from those experiences, and I'm going to have a little bit of a reflection this morning on kind of those themes and also how they manifest on the ground. So before I begin, let me just introduce the Solway Firth Partnership, who we are and what we do. So we're a cross-border charity working across a really large area. So we cover both England and Scotland on the northwest English coast, southwest Scottish coast. And there are over 51 administrative boundaries across the area that we work. But we're a really small charity as well, so we've only got 2 core staff, and I'm the only person that's the on-the-ground presence on the Cumbrian side, so that's the orange area. I'm just going to zoom in to this little area with my next slide. This is what it looks like on the ground. So I've got a picture here that I proudly took on my work phone from last winter, just on the coast, looking out at the tidal flat. And so I'm stood in this picture on the Cumbrian side, but I'm looking out, and the hill in the background is in Scotland. So it's a really picturesque place, and on a really good crisp winter day, it feels like you can almost walk across the estuary all the way to Scotland. We've got a really unique landscape in the area, so there are rocky bays and cliffs, but they alternate with estuarine salt marsh. And just to give a little bit of context of what salt marsh is, it is a coastal wetland that gets inundated with salty water, so it creates a really unique ecosystem full of salt-tolerant plants. And that provides a really amazing space. So there are creeks that build up that shelter baby fish before they go out to sea. It locks up a lot of carbon, a lot better than terrestrial forests. So it actually, I think there have been statistics citing salt marsh to lock up carbon at 40 times the rate of forests. And it's also a home for waders and lots of different birds. So it's a really magnificent place. But it's not just built by its environment, it's also built by its people and communities that have lived here for generations. And so I have this quote on the screen, which just says, "The flat expanses of the Solway allow very wide views across the estuary and the adjacent lowlands, making these landscapes particularly sensitive to change." And I highlight the words sensitive to change because this is also a contested area where there are really strong opinions about how the land needs to be managed and deep connections with the place. So the people and the community, they have a really strong sense of place in this area. And that can create a barrier sometimes to outside environmental management and just outsiders in general coming in and giving their input where maybe it might not always be welcomed. And I'm just going to situate myself in that context too. As a young practitioner, a female, a person of color working in this rural place, it can be difficult sometimes to, come in and feel like you have something to say when there is such a strong character and such a strong sense of place already existing in that area. And so my next slide. How do we deliver against these odds? And I'm going to use the personal pronoun I and myself as well, because I am the only person on the ground delivering the project that I do in partnership with Swansea University as well, who has been consulting remotely. And so I think the first thing that I want to talk about is kind of been my strategy going out there, which has been to leverage my identity, which is different and which might seem a bit, alien to people, but also being an outsider can also be a great strength too, because it puts me in a position where I am learning and begins to unpack some of those concepts that I started this talk off with about the separation of people in society, and how in the environmental sector, sometimes we've practiced things with a really strong scientific paradigm that hasn't gotten as much community input as might have been beneficial, for long-term success of projects. And how that does manifest now is legacies of disconnect, where land managers, community members have feel like management decisions have been imposed on them and decided without their knowledge that they hold about what's best for the place that they live, breathe, work in. And so I'll introduce the main project that I work on to deliver. It's called Clear Coasts, and it started off as just a coastal monitoring project. And I've got an infographic here that I actually created for one of my community engagement workshops. So this is the Mini Boy, and it's been a device that I've used to kind of do coastal monitoring, but also with community members. And the great thing about it, so it was invented by my colleague Kai Ladd at Swansea University, is that it's really easy to make. So the main expensive thing is this data logger here that I've got. You just put it in a centrifuge tube with floral foam, put a little stake on it with some zip ties, and then you can put it out at different points across the coast, and you can get really specific information about what the tides are looking like in those areas. And so you can really gain, it might not be the most precise data set, but you can gain some really good information, some really site-specific information about different ecosystems. And so I've been working a lot on the salt marsh in the Solway Firth, as well as other reef habitats. And so just a little bit about how it works. As the tide comes in, the Mini Boy gets inundated, it lifts up, wiggles around, and the data logger, it's really similar to what we have in our phones. So it just detects tilt, it detects movement. So you can kind of see on the graph the data that it gets as the tide comes in and out, and you can figure out how fast the tide is coming in, when it's coming in those really specific locations. And so now I've got this quote on the screen: the people who live off the environment know the most. And I mentioned earlier that I've been leveraging my position as an outsider in this space. When I started off my job, I was given a map with rough areas of where coastal restoration might be feasible, but that was it. So I had to figure out who owned what land. The Solway Firth on the Cumbrian side is no exception to how it is across England, in that a lot of land is privately owned, a lot of the times by separate landowners. And so I was meeting a lot of landowners and community members, trying to figure out who owns what, where, get their permissions, and also salt marsh is quite a hazardous territory to walk across, and I'd never really gone out onto salt marsh before I started. So the estuary works a bit like a funnel, in that the tide goes down really slowly but comes in hard and fast. You've got creeks that can block you when you're out in the middle of the salt marsh. You've got tidal flat that's a bit quicksandy in areas. And so I've been relying on community members and landowners like these ones who have been really kind and given me their permission to use their picture. On the left, I think it's the left, is my good friend now, Jane, and her dog, Maud. And she told me that it took her 60 years to understand which bits of the tidal flat are quicksandy and which bits are okay to walk on. 60 years, a lifetime of knowledge, nothing that I'm going to be able to know in my lifetime. So yeah, I really relied on their help to be able to not just put the mini boys out, but navigate the territory. And in that process, walking out onto the sites with them, I learned so much stories, oral histories, things that are also so critical to the environmental data that we gather. So the Solway Firth has been under-acknowledged nationally in terms of research. And there's not that much past mapping data or information about the salt marsh expanse. It is a very good salt marsh comparatively in the UK. We've actually lost overall throughout the UK more than 80% of salt marsh since the 1800s. But here it's been pretty well preserved because we're not so close to industry. But yes, I learned really specific things, like there seems to be a 30-year cycle where one side of the salt marsh erodes a lot and the other side expands, and then it kind of switches. But there's been no empirical data to back that up. It's just oral histories and generational knowledge. I've also learned about water quality just from speaking to people about what the water looked like when they were younger and how it looks now. And a lot of that information has really informed the work that I do, culminating in today, I've been enacting some actual coastal restoration based on those feasibility studies. And so the mats that you can see on the screen in front of you are called Bees Elements. They're invented by a Dutch company that were trying to find a sustainable, biodegradable alternative to plastic mats that are used to kickstart restoration. And so they're also called potato mats because they're made of waste potatoes. And it was inspired by offcuts of the French fries industry, which is pretty popular in the Netherlands. So yeah, I've been calling them the potato mats and walking around and being the potato mat girl. But so the grids work in that they have a lattice structure, and when put down on the ground, they stabilize sediment and they trap seedlings, which really helps to kickstart salt marsh growth. But this is really novel technology, and it's just kind of kicked off in the last year or two in the UK now. So it's really exciting stuff, and that was all done based off that community engagement and off of a really low budget, low personnel project. But we're pretty nationally significant now, and I've received further funding this year to upscale the matting configurations and upscale the salt marsh restoration work that I've been doing. And so I've got just another picture of the citizen science workshops that I did. So it has been community from the get-go, helping to put out the mini boys on the ground, gathering that data, and also putting out the bees elements on the ground as well, hammering it in the ground. I would not have had the budget to pay for people to come and hammer that in. So it has been really the support of community members, and it's something that's also built a bit of excitement in the area. And I'm just squeezing this in as well. In between doing all of that work, I have also monitored the carbon content of 4 marshes. And this project actually was conceived after a conversation with Jane, who I mentioned earlier, who suggested that I go to farming in protected landscapes. And so they actually helped fund and commission this separate standalone project where I was trying to detect carbon hotspots in land, how that area had been historically managed, have conversations with land managers and community members about what might have caused maybe low carbon in some places, high carbon in other places. And so that was also something that was off the backbone of landowners and community members. And so just to finish off, I think I've said quite a positive story of some of the really good experiences I've had, but that's not to say that it hasn't been challenging. I have experienced hostility sometimes because it is such a public-facing role. I have been told to go back to where I came from on the job. That does happen, and sometimes the hostility does come off of the backbone of those legacies of disconnect, of those misconceptions and the lack of communication in the past. So I think one thing that I have learned from my experience is just to make sure to tread the territory with tact. And I think the best way to do it is walking, I guess, on the salt marsh literally, but also working and walking around with that awareness of the history and legacy behind the work that we do and some of the issues that we need to unpack. But I think it's a really good opportunity now that we're starting to have these conversations. I do think that despite the difficult times that may be right now, we are in a really transitionary period, maybe transformational, in that we have an opportunity now to reimagine the work we do, the way that we interact with landowners and community members, and feel a little bit more connected, because essentially, no matter what, we all have the same goal. We all have a joint objective, is that we want the betterment for nature, never mind the different ways that we might have opinions about how land can be managed or the contestations that we might have across a territory. And so I just leave you with this quote: "A landowner knows that one field and what will grow on it." That was actually said to me by Jane as well, who I think is quite inspiring. Yeah, the best thing we can do is talk to community members, because you don't know what information you might get out of it. And I leave you with this really pretty picture of a 4 p.m. sunset on a crisp January evening in the Solway Firth, looking across the estuary again. And thank you so much for listening to me speak.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Shovi. I'm only going to ask you one question. Stay there for a second. Just tell us a little bit about what you're really looking forward to in the next year. What is 2026 going to bring on the Solway Firth?
So I'm really looking forward to upscaling the configurations that I've got on the ground at the moment. So it's not a large area that I've been able to put the mats down. It's about 40 meters squared in total. But I'm going to be having a few more workshops. It's a lot more work as well, but I'm going to be having a few more workshops in February and March, which is making the configurations larger, putting down different shapes. This is me being a bit nerdy, but also there are different shapes that you can make with the configurations that are more natural, and they have different effects in how they stabilize sediment. But on a person level, I don't want to promise this or say this out loud, but I'm just going to say it. But I've been talking a little bit to different groups in the area, specifically West Cumbria Refugee Network, and I haven't fully, got it organized, but I'm hoping to get some people who look a bit different out on the coast to doing the workshops with me, because unfortunately it has been kind of the same demographic so far that I've been doing the workshops, which is great, but it would just be nice to have some more maybe people of color or people who haven't been able to experience how amazing it is to just be out on the salt marsh. And yeah, that's something that I'm really hopeful for. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'd all love to hear maybe next year how that has gone. We're not gonna have time for questions now, but I believe you're here all day, and we will make sure that you get a chance to see some of the questions that have been coming online as well.
Yeah, and I have some magazines. They're a very limited number because I couldn't carry 200 copies. But if you approach me first, I can hand you one. And if you want to talk more about my project, happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Shovi, what a brilliant and inspirational start to communicate and to today. And you've set up so many of the themes brilliantly. I'm just going to do kind of 2 minutes of how to navigate the day, and then release you back to the coffee and to do some networking and chatting to each other. Okay, so the plan is meet back here at 3:45 p.m., basically, where we have another fantastic closing speaker who's going to reflect on our theme of Against the Odds. What you do between now and 3:45 is very much up to you. Choose your own adventure. In the coffee area, for those of you joining us in person, there's a big map, and we've got kind of 3 rooms happening, slightly in alphabetical order if that helps. This is the Beaver Auditorium, then the Pine Martin Room, then the Watervole Room. If you're online, nice and easy, you can click around the Zoom events and join the sessions that you want. Refreshments will be here in the main room. We're also really pleased to have the National Community Lottery Fund. Beth is going to be there with a little stand. I'm really interested in talking to all of you about how funding your projects or what kind of funding they might have on offer. My team and I are here to help you navigate. I hope you can make some connections with each other. We've written on your name badges a little bit at the bottom that says, ask me about. So if you want to put something interesting there, that might help open up some conversations with each other. I hope you have a fantastic day and look forward to meeting you back here at 3:45.